Hello and welcome back to the Property Roundup Show here on iProperty Radio with myself, Carol Tallon. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Kavanagh, trainer, coach and mentor, backed by 35 years experience as a real estate agent, realtor and with your broker's licence. Joe, you're very welcome. Fáilte go Connemara. Welcome to Connemara.
Thank you, Carol, and it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I've followed you for a while now, and like I say, it's just a pleasure to be here in person with you.
Oh, well, I'm so delighted by that. And I think people might be a little thrown by your accent because that's not the accent we expect of kids who are born in the Coombe.
It is.
So tell us where you're joining us from today, Joe.
Yes, well, born in the Coombe, as you say, and at 6 months old, my family immigrated to the States. And so I grew up outside the Boston area. And then at the age of about 38, I decided to make a move down south and relocated to Charleston, South Carolina, and been there ever since. Been 30 years now.
Well, you know, it's such a coincidence because I told you off air before we started recording that I was hoping to be in the Outer Banks myself for 2 weeks this month. So we might have been having this interview over there instead of having it on the east coast over there. We're having it on the extreme west coast, and actually we are on the extreme west coast of Ireland here, so if we had a good enough view we could almost see the Outer Banks.
On a clear day, yes, you can see across the pond, right?
So it's amazing actually. It's a small world and we end up where we're supposed to, but I'm so delighted that you were in Ireland over the Christmas season and that you were able to make it to Galway, so thank you so much. One of the reasons I was really keen to speak to you about is not just your 35 years experience as a realtor, and we're definitely going to draw on that. I'm really curious about your journey into coaching, mentoring, training, because I think it's something that we don't see enough of in real estate in Ireland. So talk to me a little bit about your career, because real estate wasn't your first career.
No, it was not. I've had multiple careers and I've had multiple businesses over my career. And as probably a lot of people, and more so in my generation, pre-internet, we didn't have the access that you have today to just reach out and find somebody. And me being stubborn, I learned by mistakes. And they were some of them very costly mistakes, to be quite honest with you. Okay. And I said, if I ever get there again, I won't do this. And as time evolved, of course, I did get better at it. And I became quite successful in my sales career. So at this point in my life, I don't need to work anymore, but I do love what I do, and I love to help people. So I thought, what works with that? And I've had many of my peers tell me, you should be teaching people and training people and coaching people. So as time went on, I gave it more and more thought, and had a few incidences happen to me where basically the universe kind of pounded into me, hit me over the head with it. So I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to start coaching and mentoring and training people. And so for the last 9 years, I've invested heavily in myself and a lot of training and going to masterminds and things like that, and spent, God, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars, but well worth it. And so now my goal going forward is to help other people so they don't have to go through the mistakes I went through, and they become successful much more often. And the track record I've had so far already has been spectacular, quite honestly. So I'm very happy with that.
Well, we'll chat a little bit more about that. I'm hooked on, you talked about costly mistakes, because I've been in this industry almost quarter of a century. I've made some costly mistakes, and actually my team in the background behind the cameras here will know before Christmas I made a really costly mistake, and it was a really amateurish rookie mistake. And I came back to the team and I said, you won't believe what I'd done. If I had a boss, I would be fired. And it was one of those things where I would have made the same mistake 20, 25 years ago, thought I'd learned. And I don't know, did I just get so complacent? But I found myself making the same mistake again, and I was shocked by it. And I came back and I told the team, because that's what accountability means. And the reality is, it was certainly something that would have been a firing offence, and I was really surprised by it. So tell me what you consider to be a costly mistake. Talk to me about the mistakes, and maybe then we can try to understand the pattern of learning and not repeating mistakes.
Sure. Prior to getting into real estate sales, I had bought a couple of businesses in my lifetime. One of them was a campground, and that went very well. And when it came time to sell it, We thought when we had purchased the campground, we put in a clause that said that we didn't have to pay all the accrued interest back. It would be what you call a balloon payment of principal balance remaining only. Well, that wasn't in there. We didn't read the fine print good enough. So that cost me a few $100,000, quite honestly. And I thought, oh my God. Of course, a couple other mistakes were getting into the stock market at the wrong time, right before it crashed. And I started to have that negative attitude, as Murphy's Law, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And over the years, that's where I said, if I ever get that chance again, I won't make that same mistake.
Yeah.
Yet I did make another mistake again.
But
So
was it a different type of mistake?
basically, yes, I bought a property that I thought was a great investment, and it turned out to be a sour one.
Tell us about that.
Oh, God. Got into buying a group of condominiums in the States with two other financial partners. And right after we bought them, they had the money. I had the expertise to manage the properties and handle them. So that's what they wanted me for. So I just want to preface it by saying I didn't have money into this, but I had a lot of risk involved because I was on the note. So right after we bought this was 2006, and I'm also an evaluator, a real estate appraiser, as we call it in the States, and I started to see the market cracking. And we had bought these as an investment. We were going to wait a couple of years and resell them at a profit. So I went back to my partners and I said, I think we're going to have to do this shorter, in quicker time than waiting a couple of years. And they were both accountants, CPAs. And they said, no, we're going to wait over a year to get that long-term capital gain because the rate is lower than the short-term capital gain. Mm-hmm. So they didn't agree with me. And I said, well, I want out. So they said, send a proposal. So I sent a proposal of what I could make if we sold them. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, that's not going to work because we lose your expertise. We've got to hire another property manager. They were giving me pennies on the dollar. And I do mean pennies on the dollar. They were offering me. So I called up a friend of mine, this gentleman in his 80s, great investor, very smart man who I got to know. And I says, Al, I don't know what to do. And he says, this is the way he put it. He says, how much dinero do you have into this deal? And I says, excuse me? He said, how much money you have into this? Or how much you have into this? And I said, well, if I calculate, it's about 220 hours so far. He goes, no, I'm talking about actual dollars. And I said, zero. And he said, hello. Literally what he said. He said, sign that paper before they change their mind. I said, but Al, it's only pennies on the dollar. He said, you know where the market's heading. What's the return of that amount of money on zero? I said, well, it's infinite. So he said, sign it. So I did sign that. And I thought it was the biggest mistake I had made. Come to find out, the market crashed a year or so later, and they got stuck holding the bag, so to speak. And fortunately, I got out of it. So very, very close call. And from that point on, I was super cautious about what I did. I've done a lot of investing, flipping properties. Always had a plan B. That's crucial. And in some cases, a plan C. So that's how I learned by my mistakes. Yeah. And now I know better. Yeah. So I can help others that way.
Well, thank you genuinely for sharing that, because I think that actually a lot of what I experience in the marketplace today, I can feel the legacy of people who were involved in construction or property during the crash. Essentially, the years of the crash, they were almost crisis mode. But actually, I think the years of the recovery, that's where a lot of the, I don't want to bring it down to psychological trauma, but there is definitely still trauma. There's still shame held as an industry. It's something that actually, iProperty Radio, we're 6 years broadcasting now, and as we embark on our 7th year, I know that part of this brand being established was actually to provide a safe space for the construction and planning and property, real estate industries to be able to raise issues without shame, to be able to talk about learnings, to be able to actually talk about our mistakes, because we're not an industry that's been very good at talking about our mistakes, which means we don't get to learn from them, or worse, you don't get to learn from other people's mistakes, so you go and make the same ones yourself.
Yes.
So actually, for me, it is so important that we talk about the learnings of what didn't go well, as well as celebrate what does go well. Because with every mistake, you learn something. And if you can leverage that learning, and even better, if you can share it out across the industry,
Absolutely.
then you're not just benefiting yourself, you're benefiting your future self and other people's future selves. So that's where we want to get to. So genuinely thank you, because I know it's not something we do naturally.
Right.
So I appreciate you doing it.
And if I may say, too, when the market did crash, I was heavily invested. I'm proud to say I owned 19 properties at the time. However, I ended up losing 9 of those to foreclosure or whatever. And if, for those that are younger than that era, I mean, it was a terrible time. There's no doubt about it. And no matter how savvy you were, I think most people lost anyway. And I took that all inside, and it really affected me physically. Even that's the other part people don't realize. That stress gets to you internally, so you're not as healthy and as strong and as clear-minded as you could be or should be. And I actually went to a doctor because I couldn't sleep, and thinking I just needed some sleeping pills to help me get through this, because I was worried about everything. And he what do you call it, diagnosed me as being depressed and gave me medicine for that. And I said, I'm not depressed, I just can't sleep. So a lot of confusion
But
there.
did the doctor know the genuine pressure you were under? Because
I
there's
told them,
a big
yes.
difference between depression and dealing with sources of genuine stress, financial stress, economic stress.
And the problem was I was holding this in. I wasn't even sharing it with my wife at the time. And so this really gnawed at me and affected me. And for a few years after that, my business suffered. I'm not going to lie about that. And I was wondering, God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And being an investor like that, I basically stayed out of the market for about 7, 8 years before I decided to try it again, as far as the flipping goes and investing.
Yeah.
So it really, really hit me hard that way.
I think that there will be people listening in here today that will resonate with them, because I see and I feel and I experience that all the time, and I experienced it myself. I was a self-employed single parent in this industry during the crash. The recovery was exceptionally difficult, and I feel like there was almost a time before and a time after, and they're like two different businesses, two different people, two different modes of operation. And it's something that I think is still very alive today, but maybe we don't name it. So when we talk about market forces, it is one of those forces. When we talk about forces that go into decision making around deals, it's one of those.
Absolutely.
But it's not named. And I don't think we're doing ourselves as an industry a service by not naming it, by not talking about it, by not challenging it, but also by not normalizing making mistakes ourselves, by internalizing mistakes when actually there were market forces at play that were entirely outside of people's control. So actually separating those things out as well, but also actually knowing that we deserve to be able to look towards the future, to be able to plan, to be able to want abundance, whether it's in financial deals, whether it's in our personal lives, right across that. And actually a peace. There's a peace that comes with working towards your goals and knowing that you're deserving of reaching them, that has been really missing out of the planning and construction industries. And I know this is probably a little different to what the type of topic that we normally cover, but I feel it's really important, because in Ireland, certainly, construction and real estate, they're male-dominated areas still. Now we're seeing that particularly across real estate, that's starting to change, but it's still there. And so we know that there's a difference in the way that men and women might approach things, and that has to be reflected in the business services that we're offering and how people are running their businesses. We talk all the time about how the nature of real estate is changing. But I wonder, do we really know why that's happening, and is it changing for the good?
Yes, and this is the thing to know too, that when, for example, when I was under all that stress afterwards, it affected how I deal with my clients. And you don't notice that. I didn't notice it. When I look back on things, I was not very successful for a while because I was basically taking my frustration and anger out on other people subconsciously. So it took a long time to get over that bit. Once I did, and I realized that, that's when I really started to invest in myself. And I said, you know, I need coaches That's super important. I have two coaches right now, and I mean I'm at a point in my career I don't need to work, and I've been very successful. I've been at the top, and but yet you still need those, and as you get better, it's more important to have a coach because you can easily let your ego take over, and it starts to lead you in certain directions, and it may not be the best direction. And a coach is wonderful at keeping you level-headed and on the right path and make sure you don't stray too far. So that's really, really important. And think about it, you're talking about yourself, but when you deal with clients, your sellers, your buyers, you're affecting how you deal with them. Mm-hmm. And these people are putting their biggest investment, their biggest purchase in your hands. So it's very important that you be on the top of your game for them.
I'm really interested in the coaching that you do, and I know you do it across multi-sectors, but our focus is certainly on the planning, construction, property and real estate side of things. But I'm interested in it from a couple of different perspectives. So let's just focus on, say, working with real estate agents. So yes, we can go to the broader coaching element, but I'm really interested in, say, sales training. So for example, I don't think in Ireland real estate agents, whether they're valuers, estate agents, I don't know, do many of them invest in things like real estate or sorry, sales training. I just don't know is if you know, there are certainly mastermind groups in place, and I know that there are a number of agents that would work quite closely together and would be certainly working with international coaches and trainers, and I applaud that. I think it's fantastic. You're bringing that learning together, but if you're doing it within a peer group, then it's so much more powerful because you have that accountability partner as well. But explain for people maybe who have never heard of it before, who have not invested in this. What is it? And let's try to kind of look at how it might suit in an Irish context as well.
So in the States, we talked about this a little off camera before, is one of the problems I've had getting out there, I started with the real estate people because that's my area of expertise. And I find that new people coming into the business, they're starving, they need to make a living, and it takes several months before you build up a good pipeline and income. And they're like, oh my God, I want that training, I love what you do, and they've seen examples of it. And they say, you know, as soon as I start making some money, then I'll come back for it. And then the ones that do stay in the business and they become successful enough and they do quite well, then they don't think they need it because they figured it out themselves. I have learned because of my ups and downs, and this is where I can apply that, is that, yeah, you might think that, but you might tend to make the same mistakes again.
Yeah.
I went to one agent, she's new at our company, the company I'm associated with, and she's doing phenomenal. She's one of the top agents in the area in her first year. I knew from day one, I told her, I said, you're going to be good at this. You're going to be a top agent. And she is a prime example of that and wanted to do the coaching. Now she's too busy, so she doesn't have time for it. So I said, okay, well, then you're not my client.
Yeah.
But it's very, very important to have that. And there is a distinction between coaching, training, and mentoring.
Well, you might break those down for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So training is where I actually go into, say, a classroom setting in a real estate office, and I teach you how to do something. For example, at the company I'm with, we've done a lot of training there. And I might teach them how to do a market analysis so they can figure out the value of a home. Mentoring is I'm working typically one-on-one with somebody, and they're doing things, and then I might see where they're not doing them properly or not the best way they could, so I might give them some guidance, although they're still doing the work, but I give them guidance, say, you know, actually you should probably try this way. Whereas coaching, pure coaching, which is what I like to focus on, is you're going to do all the work. I'm going to ask the proper questions to guide you in the right direction, but you will answer those questions. I don't teach you anything. I help you to discover it for yourself. And that's when it really sets in, because I think most people say, I figured that out.
Do you think there's a different approach needed for different types of people, or is it more that a certain approach is more suited at different stages of your career or your business?
I would tend to say it works the same for all people. You have to be open to learning, and you have to be open to putting up with corrections and feedback, as we call it. And that's typically what I say when I want to tell somebody you're not doing this correctly and maybe you should do it this way. I'll say, are you open to feedback, Carol? And Most people are going to say yes, sure. And then you say, have you thought about this? Or did you give this any consideration? Or something like that. And then they're like, I hadn't thought of it that way. So you get them thinking different ways than what their standard personality is their way of going. So it opens that up.
Joey, you mentioned that you worked as a real estate agent and with a broker's license, but you've actually worked in the industry for 35 years. And you mentioned just that particular woman you were giving an example of, and you said you knew day one that she was going to be really good at this.
Yes.
What makes a really good agent?
Ooh, first of all, you got to be personable. And you've got to be dedicated. You've got to be disciplined. You would need to understand people's different personalities and cater to their personalities. Instead of, that was a lot of mistakes I was making. I was getting everybody to think the way I do. And my way of thinking is, look, don't worry about the details. It'll all be taken care of. It's boilerplate items. Just sign here. Deal's done. Yeah. Whereas there's other types of people that, no, you want to explain everything to them. And once you do that, and they can study it and analyze it, and they're happy with it, then they'll agree to work with you. So, for example, when we talked about something off stage there before we came on, and before that, my closing ratio on listing appointments was hovering around 37%. Now, the industry standard is around 20-22, and that's where I was one of the top agents. So I worked in this program, and it's one of the ones that I use in my coaching now. And within a year, my closing ratio went from 37% to 86%. Now, first of all, that more than doubled my income. And I was getting to a point where I wanted to start developing my coaching business, so I didn't want to work so hard at real estate. And one of the things they say about that is you can close more sales in less time. So I put that to the test. So between 2021 and 2022, I purposely worked about half the time to see if I could sell the same amount of real estate. I actually sold more. So it's working smarter, not harder.
You referred there to something that was quite a transformative event for you. Do you want to share that? Do you feel comfortable sharing that?
Not at all. I don't mind sharing that at all. So as I say, I've studied a lot of NLP training too, and we all have different what we call map of the territory. People take in information, they process it, and they put it back out there their way.
Just for anybody who isn't familiar with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, you might just explain what it is.
Basically just that. It's how we interpret information. You and I might go into the same corporate board meeting, for example, and we hear the same thing. And we're going to come out of that room and discuss it. And maybe what you heard is totally different from what I heard. And like, wait a minute, that's not the way I took it. It's because you process information differently than I do in that example. So the key for me was when I started implementing this tool that I use, and I started to understand who my clients were and modify my presentation or the way I discuss things with them to suit the way they want to hear it, not the way I want to tell it. That's when people start to like you. And when people like you, you build rapport faster. And when you build rapport, people want to work with you. So it changes drastically.
So the experience that you had as you were going through the training?
The experience I had?
With that particular event that you referred to?
Oh, well, we went in the deep end because I saw right away where it was working. So we actually went back for training. They were looking for coaches and trainers and whatnot. So my wife and I, Cindy, we became fully certified in the system. And so we are now licensed that we can train that. And I incorporate that heavily into our training. And it works tremendously. Give you an example, the real estate company I'm associated with, once we learned that, the owner hired my wife and I to train the agents for a year. And their closing conversion rate as a company, we have about 70, 80 agents, went from 32% to 62%. And one of the things I'm very proud of is a year later, statewide, they always have they have an annual meeting where they pick the top businesses in the state. And our company came in number 2 in the state as the best place to work for small companies.
Fantastic. And you talked about, taking your own sales, being able to more than double your own closing rate.
Sure.
And the transformative event, which, you know, I would love if you were willing to share it there, just because I think it's something that is quite unexpected for somebody that's been in the industry for such a long time. Because I know from chatting to you and our contact previously that, you know, you would be coming at this very much from sales, industry, business. So we would refer to that very much as kind of a head-based
Exactly.
approach to it. So talk to me about where this shift came.
Okay. So as we talked about earlier, it was about a year ago. I was at this convention, as it turns out, for this company that designed this methodology, and I got selected to come up on stage to do a little, basically an experiment what the lady on stage was doing, and she was continually asking me my questions. Says, "What is in your heart? Where is your true essence? And who is you as a person and whatnot? And what is it? What is your purpose? What is your why?" And I said, "Well, I'm a great salesman. I want to help others to be great salespeople, so I help people." She goes, "Yeah, but that's up here. So I want to get down here." And she continued to ask me 4 or 5 different ways, different times, and she was getting closer. Then finally, she stopped me. She goes, "Look, I want you to look around this room, take your time, and look at everybody eye to eye. There's about 200 people in this room, and then tell me what you see and what you feel." So I did. I took a minute or so and I looked around, and it wasn't what I was expecting to say. And I said, she said, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see love." And she goes, "Love? Okay, we're getting somewhere. All right, explain that." And it wasn't just love from me to them, it was a mutual love. It's just like we're all humans, we're in this together no matter what your background is. And if we could just open up and accept each other and understand each other better, then we get along better. And of course, everything is more positive that way. And that changed me substantially to the point that a few months later, I was out in Vegas and I gave a talk on stage. And I basically talked about that incident. And I got people coming up to me afterwards, even men who had tears in their eyes. I still get emotional talking about it. And they said, "Thank you for saying that. That's something that needs to be heard. You need to get that message out." I even had one gentleman came up to me afterwards out in the hall, and he said, "I got to tell you," he says, "I hadn't talked to my dad in 9 years. And after what you said, I went out and called him, told him I love him." And I didn't know this guy. And we had a hug and a cry together. So that's when I said, this is what I want to focus on now. Because especially for males, whether it's in the sales world or pretty much anything, in general now, not everybody, but in general, I find that they tend to be stoic and closed up and closed off because they're not supposed to show their emotions like women do, okay? And that's the attitude they have. And we've got to be out there and be the moneymaker and be the leader and all this. Now, I know the world's changed. Women are making money too, and I'm very happy with that. So don't criticize me for it. But especially men like myself, I always thought that way. And you can't cry. You can't just break down and look weak. And I then, in my research, found that the depression rate, especially for males, is sky high. And COVID, of course, accelerated a lot of that. And the suicide rate's very high. I actually had an incident on a listing appointment where I technically saved the guy's life. And just by understanding all this. So it is important that men share more often and don't be afraid to. So I am focusing on working on primarily men and, as one lady said, and the wives who want them to be there, and working with them to get them to be more open and don't be afraid to talk about your faults or your shortcomings, because we're all human.
Yeah.
We're all there. So that's my mission. That's my purpose.
Joe, I thank you for sharing. I genuinely think this is so powerful, but it's something that I do believe it's changing. So
Yes.
I do think there's a generational issue here as well. So I do believe it's changing. But part of this, we might say, it's a generalization there to say men sometimes do this or more often do this and women more often do that. But actually, there's a reality that we've experienced in the workplace, and particularly where we're working, say, across construction and real estate. And by the way, in construction in Ireland, we lose 2 people to suicide every day in construction across Ireland and the UK. So this is something that we're very, very conscious of. And we know that part of the challenge has been around particularly business owners. So take the male and female out of it. Business owners tend to carry a lot, and they don't necessarily know where to go for support. And in some cases, particularly if they have a spouse who is working or running another business or at home with children, whatever, but they feel that their spouse is already burdened, is already loaded up. They don't want to add an additional burden. And it's something that we definitely experienced in the days and weeks and months and years after the crash. And actually, one of the very simple things that we do within Property District is actually when we're meeting, we work directly with C-suite. We work with the business owners, managers, and one of the very useful tools we do is we meet with them outside of the workplace during work hours, but outside of the workplace. So the physical leaving of the workplace, being in a neutral setting, takes away some of the titles, some of the weights of responsibility, maybe some of the perceptions that they have of themselves or the expectations they have of themselves, and try to get to a more human level where you can actually have that human conversation. The reality is everybody needs support, and I think business owners need even more support because they are not just responsible for themselves and their families, but actually a whole legion of employees and all that that brings. So there's an extra layer of responsibility and maybe not the same backup. And I know that's different for some companies. They might have a supportive board that they can lean on. That's not true of every business owner.
True.
So can you tell me a little bit about some of the business owners that you're dealing with, particularly across real estate, whether they have their 1 or 2 person operations or whether they're managing small teams? Are you starting to see some common challenges?
That's a fascinating question. And I think no matter what the business, honestly, the challenges are the same. For example, the real estate company I'm with, 2024 was a more difficult year than it has been. And especially for young agents, because they only knew the COVID years. And I think you had the same thing here, where everything was multiple offers going for over asking price. And now they get back to what I call a reality market. You and I have been around, so we know what
Ireland
the normal...
still hasn't gone back to a reality market.
I see that. Although we have pretty much in 2024 because interest rates jumped up so high. But that's the new norm. They're not going back down to 2 and 3%. So people need to get used to that. So it's very, very difficult because you have sellers who own a home with a very low interest rate. They don't want to sell it and move to a new one and pay 6, 7%. So we have that challenge. And what it really boils down to answer your question, is you need to understand where people are at and how they're struggling and how you might offer a solution or support. Now, sometimes it's not listing or selling a house for them. If I may refer back to that gentleman I was talking about, I went to list his property and he showed me through the whole home, which we tend to do, get a tour. And there was one room that was closed off. He didn't open the door. And I kind of surmised that was the primary bedroom. So I asked him about that. And he says, oh, that's our bedroom. And he says, my wife passed away 2 weeks ago, and I just can't go in there. Haven't been able to go in since. I said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. So I'm thinking, this guy wants to sell the home. This is very quick. So he sat down, he talked about it, and he said, I just got to get out of here. And he was an older gentleman. And after he was talking, I could tell he still had a lot of grief to process. He was still in a bit of shock, actually. So knowing his personality type, I talked to him in a way that he would listen to me. And I said, Steve, I said, I understand that you want to sell your property. I said, but I can't list your home right now. Now, that's something a real estate agent wouldn't typically say. And he said, what do you mean you won't sell my home for me? Isn't that what you do? I said, yes, it is what I do. But you are not in a position to make that decision right now. This is a big decision for you. So what I'd like you to do is take a little time to process your grief, And when the time comes, I'll be there for you. But don't make a rash decision that you're going to regret later.
Yeah.
So as it turned out, it was about 5 months later. He did. He called me and he says, I thought about what you told me and I'm ready to go. So we go over there to list the house, and he brought down his sister who's going to help him move across country. Mm-hmm. And the two of them start to get into an argument. And I'm sitting there trying to keep the peace. So anyway, it boils down to, he says, nobody understands what I'm going through, and I just want to take myself out, be done with it. And I knew he owned a gun. So I thought, okay, I got to put myself to work here. And I said, Steve, I understand how you feel. This is a very traumatic situation. Fortunately, I've never been through it, but a lot of people do go through it, a lot of men especially. And I said, how about if you look at this a little bit differently? And he said, how so? I said, instead of thinking, you have a problem when nobody understands what you're going through, at least in your group, your associates, and your family. I said, but there are a lot of men out there that would understand. So when you get to your new location, would you do me a favor and consider joining a support group for widowers? And he just kind of looked at me and I said, and maybe it isn't so much to help you. Maybe you don't want that help, but you could save some lives by sharing your grief with others, especially the men. And he said, I'll think about that. And the next thing you know, he said, I'm going to do that. So I like to think I contributed to it, not the cause, but obviously contributed to it by understanding him, not what I wanted to do, just get that listing and sell it and make the commission. And he went to the new location and he did just that. So very, very grateful for that. And that's the thing, you've just got to understand the people and what their needs are. Mm-hmm. And it's not always selling a property or helping to buy a property.
Yeah.
I do a similar thing when I'm showing buyers around. I go into a house and they say, okay, this is the one, we want to make an offer. So before we do that and write the paperwork up, I want you to walk around the house again, and does it feel like home? Is the energy there? That's the key. Because if it doesn't feel like home, it's not going to be your home. Mm-hmm. And I've had many of my clients come back and thank me for that. So it's just a little bit of taking extra steps like that. And that's the type of thing that I like to work with people and show them how to do that.
Do you think that approach, that very kind of heart-centered approach, is one that we see typically across real estate? And I'm conscious that you work internationally, so I suppose I am very selfishly thinking of an Irish perspective. But knowing that the system of buying and selling property in Ireland is very different, say, for example, in parts of the US, well, actually all of the US, but obviously there are regional differences there as well. But in terms of the professionalism of agents, how we approach it, understanding that it is still a people business, and while I'm always advocating for technology to replace many of the things that agents do, I'm also very much aware that it is, it's not just it's not just a people business, but actually you're helping people at points of vulnerability, extreme highs and extreme lows in their life.
Yes.
Do you think there's enough training for people coming into the industry around that?
No, not at all. In the States, and you're going to be surprised at this, to get your real estate license, you take 90 hours of classwork and then pass a test, and you are licensed. It's that simple. The problem I see, especially with new agents coming in, they still don't know what the forms are properly for. They still don't know the ins and outs of the everyday work and what's involved. And there are so many issues to take care of, because once a property goes under contract, okay, now we got to make sure that buyer goes to the bank and applies for the financing on time, because everything's got a deadline. Get the home inspection done, get that report back, consider it, ask if there's any repairs to be done. There's so much to do that they don't understand, and they're not getting in the classroom. And me having the dual hats of also being an appraiser, evaluator, I've gone into trained classes to show them how it's done, because they're like, how come this house isn't worth $650,000? I said, well, let me show you what the data is saying. And when I show it to them, it's like the first time they've ever seen it. And I said, didn't they cover this in your 90 hours? They said, well, they showed us the form, but we didn't actually go through it to know what it is. So to me, I think there's a lot more education that needs to go on. I will say this, you're not going to get it all in a classroom like that. It's life experiences day in, day out. So have a mentor. And our company is very good about that, the one I'm associated with. They do have mentors go with the new agents. And I've trained many of them in our office. So definitely a big plus there.
Um, in the US, where maybe the market you're most familiar with, what's attracting the next generation of talent into this industry?
Oh, the big money you make. They
I
all
see
want to
that's
make the
definitely
big
not
money.
attracting people into the Irish market.
I really now, in case I didn't say this earlier, I started studying the Irish market about 2 years ago when I got my international designation, and I was really kind of shocked at the commissions they're making.
Did you decide you didn't want to study the Irish marketplace anymore when you realised
I,
they weren't
I,
making a
I don't
lot
want
of
to
money?
work over here. I might buy something, but I don't want to work over here.
Yeah.
And in the States, it is much higher.
Well, let's just compare it. So in the States, you'd be looking at what, 6, 7%?
Actually, the average used to be around 5, 6, sometimes 7%. I usually got a premium, but there's no set rate, but it's just kind of an understanding that that's what most people do because you got to compete with
Yeah.
your competitor. And that has been dropping lately. And now the other big issue that just happened was the National Association of Realtors got sued. Three of the biggest agencies groups out there sued them because the seller was paying all that commission from the price of the home at the settlement. Okay, so half goes to the listing agent, half typically goes to the agent that brings the buyer. So they're saying, why should we pay the buyer's agent when they're not working for us? They're working against us technically. So that lawsuit got settled and the NAR lost, basically. So now we can't advertise what we're offering for a co-broke commission. It can't be in any of the publications. And
Joe, would you mind just taking a moment to explain that? Because I only know what I've read internationally, but actually, I'm quite confused about that. And in Ireland, while we've had buyer's agency in Ireland for the past 20 plus years, we're seeing quite a growth in that, but we don't have a multiple listing system. So actually, anybody who hires a buyer's agent is paying for a buyer's agent. So can you explain can you just explain the legality or the judgment and the impact of that judgment, what it means for the marketplace?
okay, so now because the co-broke isn't advertised, if I sign you to be a buyer, okay, and I'm your agent, I'm working for you, not the seller, all right? And if I'm going to go show you a house, now, before I used to know that, okay, they're going to give me 2, 3%, whatever it is, when the property sells. So I know what I'm going to be getting. Now you don't know. So we actually came up with new forms where you have to ask the agent ahead of time that has a listing, is the seller willing to pay a co-broke fee? And if they're not, now by law, that shouldn't affect what we do because I'm working for you. If you want to see that house, I show it to you. But I have to get compensation. So the new agreement would be that now, Carol, you agree to pay me, let's just use 2.5% as a number. You agree to pay me 2.5% of the purchase price when I find you the home. However, in the contracts and the offers now, we are saying that we're asking the seller, first of all, to pay that. So it doesn't come out of your hide as an extra cost. And so far, because this only went into effect last August, so far we've been getting around it by still offering that co-broke. I would say probably 95% of the sellers out there will still offer it. There could come a time where they won't offer anything.
And if that were to happen, what's that likely to do for buyer's agency?
Well, you've got to be careful that you get an agreement signed right up front. That's another fault I've found with a lot of agents. They don't get that buyer agency agreement signed. So if a buyer finds a property, there is ways that they could get around paying you. I've never seen it happen. But now it's more and more important that you get that down on paper, that they're
Okay.
going to have that.
It's interesting, and I know we need to kind of wrap up shortly, but just because we're talking about buyer's agency, it's something that licensed estate agents in Ireland can act for the buyer or the seller, and if they act for the buyer, they're paid for by the buyer. If they act for the seller, they're paid for by the seller. And but actually, it's something that we not enough agents are doing, and I don't know if they're aware that they can do it, that they're licensed to do it, that it could be a potential source of revenue. But particularly across rural Ireland, where we haven't seen an influx of, say, new homes, or there hasn't been a lot of new homes development, and the turnover of second-hand properties has been exceptionally slow over the last number of years, purely because the people who might want to sell, they don't have new stock to move into. They don't,
Exactly.
you know, there's nowhere for them to go. So actually, it's not a demand issue. It's very much a supply issue. But I just wonder about the viability of rural estate agents, and I would love to see more. Who particularly where we are in the west of Ireland. There are estate agents, and they tell me that they spend their summers showing people who have an interest in the area properties, and they might do this for 2, 3, 4, 5 summers in a row before the people find this one home and they buy it, whether as a holiday home or they're going to spend part of their time. And generally speaking, those agents aren't charging any buyer's agency fees, so they're waiting until they have the right property to sell, or in some cases they're just sending the buyers to another selling agent. And actually, we'd love to see more of them embrace buyer's agency. Is that something you would advocate for, particularly in rural areas?
Absolutely, because you don't want to work for nothing, right? As we call it in the States, spinning your wheels. Just what are you going to get paid for showing these people around? You're just a chauffeur.
Yeah.
And a door opener with the
Yeah.
key, right? No, I particularly, and most good agents out there, successful agents in the States, they will not work with anybody who's showing property till they sign an agreement to work with them and pay them when they find a place. Now, if you never find a place, life changes, spouse passes away, family changes, your job does, and you decide not to move to our area, okay, that's a chance we take. But generally, I'd say vast majority of the time, they end up buying something.
Yeah.
And in that case, we get paid at the closing. So the other good thing too is a buyer agency, that agent's representing you. They're not working for the seller. See, in the States, if you don't have that agency agreement signed, they're technically working for the seller
Yeah.
to get the best price they can for it. So you want somebody, a professional, that can represent you and negotiate on your behalf.
Joe, final question before we
Sure.
wrap up. Because you work internationally and you have this kind of 3.5 decade long career in real estate, and now are working as kind of a trainer and coach and mentor, what are the key differences you see between agents in the US and agents in Ireland?
Oh, let's see. I can't speak too highly on that because I haven't dealt closely with a lot of agents in Ireland. But some of the situations you get into, more so, is like you could have a bid on a property, if I understand it properly, and then a month or two later somebody comes along with a better offer, they can knock you out.
Gazumping.
In the States, you are locked in. And somebody can put in a backup offer, but that offer is not legal unless you back out of the deal. And then they take over. So that's one of the things. But as far as agents go, I think they're working hard on both sides of the pond, I would say for sure, at least the ones I've met.
Equally rewarded?
Oh, that I don't ask, and I don't think so because I know what your commission rates are here versus ours. It's probably more lucrative in the States. I mean, a good agent.
Are you genuinely saying you think it's probably more lucrative? It's about 3 times more lucrative in the.
I'm being kind now.
But let's be real. It's about 3 times more lucrative to be doing this in the US than it is to be doing it in the Irish marketplace.
Okay,
we want to secure the best talent
Yes.
to come into this.
Yes.
So the best talent is only going to come into this industry and keep it vibrant and brilliant and invest in technology if they're properly paid.
Yes. No, I totally agree. And a good agent in the States will make 6 figures in their income. Our company emphasizes that. The owner, Matt O'Neill, he doesn't like to hire anybody unless they're going to be dedicated and listen to what they're coached and trained. And I would say probably 70% of the agents that come into our company do become that successful. So we have a very good agency that way. They're not all like that. There are some brokers and owners who are not even present. Our broker owner, they're present every day. They're right there for you, and they share things with you. And their general interest is in you. They want to make you wealthy by learning how to invest and sell right. So big difference there.
Final question, Joe. How can you help Ireland-based estate agents?
From the people I've talked to, and this is not a slight on you, I think it's very good that it's difficult to build connections with agents here because the Irish people, and I think Europeans in general, they're more cautious. In other words, they don't know me. I'm coming in, this American, I'm going to sell you a package and see you later. No, it's not the way I work. But they do want to know who you know. And so that's why I've been working on just getting to know people, having that relationship with them so they can refer us. And I do believe that every agent should have training going on constantly and eventually have a coach. For example, in our group, I do work with a group, we call ourselves Team Excellence, and we have a variety of training. And it's as little as a couple of pints a month to you could spend 5 figures a year if you really want to get into it. But the success rate is, the testimony is there. So we've proven ourselves, and I'm very good about that. And I will always over deliver. We never under deliver. So that's pretty much a guarantee.
Joe, thank you so much. How can people get in contact with you?
Well, of course, I have a mobile number, but it's a U.S. number. That's, if anybody wants it, it's 843-345-8506. And our email that we're currently using, I'm hoping to change that, but it's candjcoaching@gmail. It's, my wife is Cindy, and I'm Joe, so it's CANDJ coaching@gmail.com.
I would just recommend people to take a look at Joe's LinkedIn and follow along there.
Absolutely.
And there's a nice shortcut to it. Joe, thank you so much again. Thank you for taking not just coming to Ireland, but coming to the west of Ireland, coming to Connemara. I hope you enjoy the remainder of your trip to Ireland, and I hope we see you on Irish shores more regularly going forward.
Me as well, and it's been an honor being here, and it was a beautiful ride out here from Galway. So first time in Connemara, and I love it.
Galway is always a good idea. That's
Yes.
going to become our closing mantra for the show.
There we go.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all we've time for today. That was Joe Kavanagh, real estate professional in the industry and a trainer, coach and indeed mentor. My thanks as always to producer Katie Tallon at Here We Were Media on Sound. And finally, thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next Property Roundup here on iProperty Radio. In the meantime, please be sure to check out all of the other construction and real estate shows here on iPropertyRadio.com.